Well, good evening, folks, and welcome to our Tuesday night home Bible study. Tonight we'll be looking at Genesis chapter 36, which contains 6 genealogical lists. If I could say that without getting my tongue tangled up, maybe I can pronounce these names as well. Before we even read, these names are multiple choice names. You can say them any way you want to. It'd probably be as near to right as I am. What this chapter does, it brings to a conclusion the Jacob and Esau materials, and most, or at least the majority of what is in this chapter has to do with Esau's family and his settlement at a place called Mount Seir, which was down below the Dead Sea, in the desert area between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba in modern day geography. Let's read it, and then we'll talk about these genealogies. Now, these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives of the daughters of Canaan, Adah the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah the daughter of Anah the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. And Adah bore to Esau Eliphaz, and rather than reading all this stuff and then going back through all this stuff. In the first 3 verses, you have the list of 3 of Esau's wives. Now, we've been introduced to 3 of Esau's wives prior to this, back in chapter 26, verses 34 to 35, and again in chapter 28 and verse 9. Back in chapter 26, verses 34 and 35, we're told that Esau married 2 sisters who were the daughters of a man, I think his name was Beeri. And the names there were Basemath, which is one of the names that's here, but here is given as Ishmael's daughter, but there is given as Beeri's daughter, along with another daughter that he married named Judith, who is not mentioned again. Then later in chapter 28, after Isaac and Rebekah sent Jacob away to Haran to find a wife, supposedly, Esau then saw that the Canaanite girls that he had married were not pleasing to his parents. He might not have been good, but he was slow, and he realized that his wives were not suitable. So then he married Mahalath, who was listed there as Ishmael's daughter. There's some confusion here about the names and the genealogies of these wives. Again, the Bible is very consistent in everything it teaches. Sometimes the details don't exactly match up. And again, we're dealing with really ancient literature that may, particularly when you're dealing with things like genealogies, these often come from prior written sources that were incorporated into the text, and lots of these things, were handed down and recopied, and lots of ways they could, and probably some come from some different traditions of how these things came. So anyway, the 3 wives have different names, and again, sometimes people have more than one name, so there's lots of ways of looking at all of this stuff. I don't get too bent out of shape over this. I think it's just incredible how reliable the Bible is in all the things that it teaches that match up with each other wonderfully. Anyway, we have the basic genealogy down through verse 5, which give the sons of Esau. And then verses 6, 7, and 8, which we also read, give the account, or an account, of how Esau ended up at a place called Mount Seir, which is connected with him. It sounds like here, verses 6, 7, and 8, that much as the case was with Abram and Lot back in chapter 12, that the land, when they came back from Egypt, they had such flocks and herds that the land couldn't carry them all, and so they decided to part ways. And here the story is given as being sort of the same situation, which is probably so, because we know that Jacob had all kinds of flocks and herds that he was driving and bringing, and Esau had done well as well. And when they both of them in the land, they would probably need to be separated from each other, not only so that the land could carry them, but so they could keep their flocks separate and know whose was whose. It's also interesting that when you look back at chapter 33, along about verse 14, when Jacob was coming in, and had wrestled with the angel the night before, and then Esau came to meet him with the 400 men. They had agreed that he would go and follow Esau softly, going slowly, so that the flocks and herds could, wouldn't be weakened down and lose a lot of them, and also because of the children. But he was supposed to go and stay with Esau at Mount Seir, according to verse 14 of chapter 33. So Esau already was at Mount Seir at least part of the time, but what it sounds like here is now it became pretty much Esau's permanent dwelling place, and he turns over, the Canaan to Jacob. Anyway, then beginning verse 9, and we'll read here down through verse 14, this is the third section, which will take the genealogy of Esau down to the grandsons. And these are the generations of Esau, verse 9, father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, or Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau; Reuel, the son of Basemath, the wife of Esau. And the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, and Gatami, and Kenaz. By the way, if you're getting ready to have a baby and you need some names, if you have quintuplets, there's 5. And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore to Eliphaz Amalek. Now that's a familiar name. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Reuel, Nahath, and Zerah, and Shema, and Mizah. These were the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these were the sons of Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon, Esau's wife. And she bore to Esau Jeush, and Jalam, and Korah. We'll stop right there for a minute and talk briefly about this. You'll notice in verse 9 it says these are the generations of Esau, father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. 3 names are associated with Esau. Of course, Esau is his given name. We remember from back in chapter 25, that I think chapter 25, verse 25, when Jacob and Esau were born, we were told that Esau, the first one, came out hairy all over like a hairy garment. And so they called him Esau, which in Hebrew means hairy. Been something to see. I just can't quite imagine. Here's a baby that probably had to shave the first day of his life, Anyway, but the word Esau means hairy. The name Mount Seir, S-E-I-R, you could pronounce it Seir. Mount Seir is how I normally say it, but you could say it the other way or any other way you want to. But Seir also is another word for hairy. And Mount Seir, it is a plateau down south of the Dead Sea that rises to an elevation of about in the neighborhood of 5,000 feet. And it was covered with brush, low-growing brush for centuries, up until it was all denuded, burnt off, and blown off during the First World War. But from a distance, it looked like that plateau was covered with hair. And so that's where the name Mount Sire came from, that means hairy, because that plateau looked like it was covered with hair from a distance. I don't know if it has grown back. It's been 100 years since World War I now. Boy, that's hard to believe. When I was a boy, I knew several men in our church and community that were veterans of World War I. Anyway, they're all gone now. So Esau and Sire mean hairy. Well, he's also identified as Edom. In fact, verse 8, backing up, Esau is Edom. And here's the generations of Esau, father of the Edomites. The word Edom means red. And we've also seen a couple of explanations for his name being red. In chapter 25, verse 25, and I'll turn right back there right quick, when the Esau and Jacob were born, it says, the first one came out red, that is, Edom, all over, like a hairy garment. And so you have the word Edom, red, with Esau at his birth. Don't know if that means he was red-headed or red-haired, we don't know. But the word red is associated with him from that. And also, on over a chapter or two later, if you remember, when Esau came in that day from hunting and hadn't had any luck, and he was hungry, and Jacob was boiling pottage, a kind of stew, and Esau said, give me some of that pottage before I die, and sold his birthright to Esau for that pottage. Well, it was red pottage, and we're told there that Esau is called Edom because of that red pottage. So at least a couple of explanations. Again, probably multiple reasons why he is called red or Edom. And the nation that was made up of his descendants were called the Edomites, and their traditional home area was around Mount Sire, down below the Dead Sea. Anyway, got a couple of names here that are familiar, and at least that those names occur again. In verse 10, the names of Esau's sons, well, the first one is Eliphaz. And if you look down at verse 11, the first son of Eliphaz is called Teman. It's interesting, in the book of Job, which was written much later, but the setting of the book, the time frame in which the story occurs, is early, maybe along during this period. But one of Job's three friends is called Eliphaz, and he's called the Temanite. Now here, the son of Eliphaz is called Teman. In the book of Job, Eliphaz being the Temanite, he would have been a descendant or a son of Teman. Anyway, but there are those two names together in two different verses. Don't know if there's a connection or not, but it is just quite interesting to me to wonder about. Again, when we get to heaven, the Lord will explain all this, but I probably won't care then. I'll be so enthralled with him. Anyway, move on down, and you have among the other grandsons, this genealogy, verses 9 through 15 through 14, goes down through the grandsons. One of them is the son of Eliphaz is called Amalek. And a familiar name and a familiar nation in the Old Testament are the Amalekites. One of the first encounters that we have with them as a nation is early on in the Exodus, soon after the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea, and they encounter the Amalekites, and they have to fight with them. And that's the story where Moses and Aaron and Hur, that's not a she, it's H-U-R, Aaron and Hur get on both sides of Moses. Moses up on the mountain as he holds up his arms with the rod of God in the posture of prayer. The Israelites are victorious, and then as his arms get heavy and he lets them down, the Israelites begin to lose. And so Aaron and Hur hold up his arms the whole rest of the day, and Israel has the victory. Again, leaders need helpers to hold up their arms and support them. And but anyway, the Amalekites were enemies of Israel throughout the Old Testament. Again, later on, King Saul is instructed through Samuel over in 1 Samuel to eradicate the Amalekites, which he fails to do, and chooses to not completely follow the instructions that the Lord had given through Samuel. And that is one of the reasons why the Lord, removed Saul and his family from being king, and sought after a man after his own heart, whose name was David, to be the second king of Israel. Let's see if I don't see anything else that I need to or know enough to comment on in verses 9 through 14. Let's read the next genealogical list that will contain some of the same names as the sons and grandsons of Esau. This next list will list them as chieftains. Your King James Version will call them dukes, but the word for that means chieftain. In fact, it comes in two forms, aloof and aleph. And aloof means chief, and aleph means thousand. And so the idea is that these were chieftains over thousands, is kind of the idea here. Anyway, let's read this and see what comments we need to make from verses 15 down through verse 19. And these are the chiefs, I'll read it, of the sons of Esau, the sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn of Esau, chief Teman, chief Omar, chief Zepho, chief Kenaz. Now, you'll notice those are the same names as what was given back in verse 11, but now they're called chieftains. Chief Korah, chief Gatam, and chief Amalek. These are the chiefs that came from Eliphaz in the land of Edom. These were the sons of Ada. And these are the sons of Reuel, Esau's son, chief Nahath, chief Zerah, chief Shema, chief Mizah. These are the chiefs that came of Reuel in the land of Edom. Of course, those names have been given before. These are the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, chief Jeush, chief Jalem, chief Korah. These were the chiefs that came of Aholibamah, daughter of Anah, Esau's wife. Of course, those names were given before in verse 14, but they got chief attached to them. Chief over 1,000 is the idea. And these are the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these are their chiefs. And what this signifies is, after about 3 generations, there were so many of Esau's descendants that they are becoming a nation, and these are the tribal leaders. Now we move in verse 20, going down to verse 30, we move away from the family of Esau down to other peoples who populate that same area that presumably will intermarry with the descendants of Esau. And let's read verses 20 to 30, and we'll make some comment about these. There's one rather humorous little vignette in these verses that we'll talk about as well. These are the sons of Sire, verse 20, the Horite. And again, you've got the word Sire, which means hairy, and it also, Mount Sire has a connection with a particular man who was Sire, the Horite, who inhabited the land, Lotan and Shobal and Zibeon and Anah, and Dishon and Ezer and Dishan. I wonder if Dishon and Dishan were twins. I doubt it. These are the chiefs of the Horites, the children of Sire, in the land of Edom. And the children of Lotan were Hori and Hemam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. And the children of Shobal were these, Alvin, and Manahath, and Ebal, and Shepho, and Onam. And these are the children of Zibeon, both Ajah and Anah. This was that Anah that found the mules, your King James Version will say, in the wilderness. More modern translations will read that found the hot springs in the wilderness as he fed the asses of Zibeon, his father. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And the children of Anah were these, Dishon and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah. Also notice that this Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, verse 25, is one of the wives of Esau, if you look back in verse 2. Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, is listed as, this is how it connects up with Esau right here in verse 25. These are the children of Dishon, Hemdan, and Eshban, and Ithran, and Kiran. The children of Ezer are these, Bilhan, and Zaavan, and Achan. Children of Dishon are these, Uz, and Aaron. These are the chiefs that came from the Horites, Chief Lotan, Chief Shobal, Chief Zibeon, Chief Anah, Chief Dishon, Chief Ezer, Chief Dishan, and these are the chiefs that came of Hori among their chiefs in the land of Sire. Well, we've already pointed out one thing that's pretty important, the connection between these Horites, verse 20, the word Horite there. Also, the Horites are known in ancient history as the Hurrians, Hurrians. I don't think it meant they were in a hurry all the time, but they're called the Hurrians, and they were a rather large group of people that populated areas in Mesopotamia as well as down in the southern part of the land that later became known as Moab and Edom, which is where we're talking about right now. Also up around in the area of Syria, which is up to the north of Palestine, up above Phoenicia. There were some of them that lived there. They were a sort of a scattered peoples, but there were groups of Hurrians or Horites that lived here around Mount Sire, and one of them, we're told, was named Sire because these are his sons, verse 20 and following, which gives us another way that Mount Sire could have gotten his name, besides meaning hairy and being covered with brush, the mountain that looked like hair, from a distance. Lots of times there's 2 or 3 explanations in Scripture for the same thing. Doesn't mean these contradict each other. It just means there's more than one explanation for lots of things. And again, the truth, it probably includes all of this. Anyway, I want to mention just a moment, verse 24, about Anah. This was that Anah that found your King James will say, the mules in the wilderness as he fed the asses of Zibeon, his father. This is actually a racial slur from a Jewish perspective. Racism, by the way, is not a new thing. And it is, again, it's never been eradicated, but it goes way, way back. We've seen some racial slurs already a time or two prior to this, back in the story of Noah after the end of the flood. I think in Noah, in chapter 9 or chapter 10, I think it's chapter 9, when Noah had grown grapes and got drunk off the wine, and he was laying uncovered in his bed in his tent, and one of his sons went in, Ham went in and discovered and saw his father, unclothed, and the other two sons, Shem and Japheth, went in backwards, and so they didn't see their father uncovered and covered him up. And when Noah came to, he put a curse on one of the sons of Ham, whose name was Canaan. Again, children of Israel, original readers of this, going into the land of Canaan, would see that curse as being on the Canaanites, who they were going into their land to dispossess them. And that was sort of a racial slur against them. Here is a racial slur against the Edomites from the Jewish perspective. Again, the original readers were the Hebrews of this material. Hebrews, by the time this was written down, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, were enemies of the Edomites, and they were bitter enemies throughout most of the Old Testament. And there's a Jewish tradition among the rabbis that the word that's translated, the King James translates it mules. The more modern translations render it hot springs. It refers to water. In fact, in the Samaritan Pentateuch, the word is slightly different, which clearly means water. But the word yemim, which is used here, is the only place in the Old Testament you find this word. The rabbis chose to translate it as mules. The actual meaning of the word, as near as scholars today can discover, it means hot springs or springs of hot water. The basic meaning of the word is hot, and it refers to hot water, hot springs. Because it's not used other places in the Old Testament, it's not actually clear. It is used, I think, in extra-biblical sources, but the rabbis rendered it mules because mules are hybrid animals. Mules cannot procreate. And the rabbis chose to render this word mules here as a slam against the Edomites because of a Jewish racial slur that says the Edomites have trouble procreating. Anyway, obviously from the number of genealogies here and people in them, they procreated okay. But the Hebrews, use that kind of as a slur against them. As far as names here, the only name that is familiar from other places in the Bible is now verse 28. Another connection with the book of Job. Children of Dishon are these, Uz and Aaron. Uz, Job lived in the land of Uz, if you look in the first verse of the book of Job. And again, this kind of connects it, perhaps grounds the story of Job in this period, though it was written much later. It's part of the large body of wisdom literature that comes from later Old Testament times. Anyway, going down verse 31 to the end of the chapter, we'll cover this fairly quickly. And these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. And Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhabah. And Bela died, and Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, reigned in his stead. And Jobab died, and Husham of the land of Temani reigned in his stead. And Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who smote Midian in the field of Moab, reigned in his stead, and the name of his city is Avith. And Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah reigned in his stead, and Samlah died, and Shaul of Rehoboth by the river, and that's the Euphrates, reigned in his stead. As Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, reigned in his stead. And Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, died, and Hadad reigned in his stead. And the name of his city was Pau, and his wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, the daughter of Mezahab. And these are the names of the chieftains that came from Esau, according to their families, after their places, by their names: Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Aholibamah, Chief Elah, Chief Pinan, Chief Kenaz, Chief Timon, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, Chief Iram. These are the chiefs of Edom, according to their habitations in the land of their possession. He is Esau, the father of the Edomites. Okay, you really got kind of two things here. You've got Edomite kings now. Notice there's only one Edomite king at a time, so it gives one after another and tells this one lived and he died, and then the next one and the next one and the next one in a line after each other. This would probably cover several. It's numerous generations. Would probably cover at least 200 or 300 years time. The only person that is familiar at all among these from anywhere else in the Bible is in verse 32, Bela, the son of Beor. This is perhaps the same person that is called Balaam, the son of Beor, in Numbers chapter 22 and 24. He's the one who was hired, the prophet for hire, who was hired by the king of Moab to put a curse on the Israelites as they were passing through Moab on the way to make conquest of the Promised Land just before the death of Moses. And Balaam was the one that had the donkey that spoke. The donkey was more spiritual than Balaam was. The donkey saw the angel that was there to keep them from going to put the curse on the Israelites. Balaam didn't see it. He was kind of a false prophet. He's sort of the prototype in the Old Testament of the charlatan preacher, sort of like Simon Magus in the book of Acts and Elymas Magus also in the book of Acts. The word magus is related to magi, which is also related to magician and magic. When it says in verse 38 that the Shaul of Rehoboth by the river, in the Old Testament, when it just says the river, it's either talking about the Nile or the Euphrates, depending upon which area geographically is being described at that time. And much closer to the Euphrates here than to the Nile. Anyway, the last little section there, verses 40 to 43 that I already read, are kind of the Edomite territorial governors later on. Really, these would have been probably during the time after the Israelite conquest, when these would have been ruling. So this chapter covers quite a bit of history, but it puts everything that's connected with Esau together in one place at the end of the Jacob stories. There's actually no better place to put Esau's material than connected with Jacob. The next chapter here will begin the Joseph novella, and Jacob is not dead yet, but all the things we're told about Jacob from here on they're all in the context of telling the story of Joseph. And Jacob is sort of he is fading out as a main character. Joseph is fading in, and the rest of the book of Genesis will be to do with Joseph. Not a whole lot of doctrinal stuff tonight, just a lot of historical and genealogical stuff, but the Bible contains a whole lot of material, and it's just amazing the wealth of historical and as well as doctrinal material in the Scriptures. Again, all of these people, all of them play a small part in that plan that God had, that one day through the descendants of Abraham, particularly through Jacob and his family, would come a Savior that we know as Jesus Christ. Hope you have a good night, and hope you know Jesus Christ as your Lord. Thanks for joining us.